Hello dear chess friends, this is Grandmaster Leonid Kritz for chesslectures.com. Today I'll show you a game from St. Louis chess tournament between Hikaru Nakamura and Ding Liren. So Nakamura had white, he started with d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, and Ding played e6. So, I know I'm not sure about this, the opening choice. I think against Nakamura it's probably better to play something else, maybe a6 or bishop f5. Yeah, but not this main sharp lines. You will see why. So bishop g5, h6. Black takes on c4, e4, g5. So this is one of the main lines of Botvinnik system. Bishop g3 and b5. So black has an extra pawn, but he has two problems. One of them is that he has weakened both sides. The king side is weak, so he cannot castle short. And on the queen side, if white wants to create an attack, then he can go with a4. So the black king is not going to be safe for a long time. In addition, so far black moved only his pawns. White had already 3 pieces out there, and it's his move now. And of course, last but not least, white has the center. There are multiple ways white can play here. I think there is move e5, there is h4, but there is also bishop e2, and this is considered one of the main moves, which Nakamura also played. So now if black plays b4, then white has knight a4, knight takes e4, and bishop e5. And again, this is going to be a very sharp line. There are many possibilities. After f6, for example, white has multiple possibilities. He can take on c4 and then take with a knight on e5 with idea queen h5. He can try something with knight d2 and bishop h5. I think this looks pretty reasonable. F takes e5, knight takes e5, queen h5 is a threat, short castle. Well, usually it's very difficult to survive in such a position, even though black has an extra pawn, but the activity of white pieces is tremendous. Alright. So, black has got 1 pawn, it's enough. He should now take care of his development. So, Ding plays bishop b7. Well, in long run, if white doesn't do anything, then black will simply develop his pieces and he will keep the extra pawn. So white has to play dynamically, which makes sense. So what dynamic possibilities exist in this position? Not so many, actually. One of them is b3, another one is a4, and the third one is h4. Well, b3 has many drawbacks. b3 is pretty bad because, at least for the reason that black can play bishop b4 and then take on e4. So that's not good at all. a4 makes not much sense too because black can simply play a6. Now in many variations, if black plays b4, the knight will not have the square a4 and will have to go back. Besides, of course, black could play b4 immediately, but personally I don't like playing b4 and weakening the pawn c4. I prefer to keep the pawn structure a6, c6, b5, c4 as long as possible, and always keep this opportunity open. I can play b4 at any moment. Which means that white is left with h4 only, and of course that's the main move. So now, black shouldn't take on h4, because then white takes with the bishop. There is this, the knight is pinned, bishop e7 is an option, but even after e5, white gets a good play. Bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, and knight e4. The knight wants to go to d6. the white king can stay in the center after queen b4, for example. The king can go to f1, that's not a problem, no one is attacking the king, and the rook h1 is already playing, it's very active. The black king is exposed to all white pieces, and later on white probably will play with b3, a4, and so on. But for now, of course, knight d6 is a very dangerous strat. So taking is not good. Also playing rook g8 makes little sense because white will take. Now his rook on h file again became active, and this position will be difficult for black to defend. White can play again things like e5, knight e4. So g4, this is the most natural move. Knight e5, of course. Well, the pawn hangs on g4, and if white gets the pawn back, then black will stay with all the same problems, like the king is still in the center, the bishop on b7 is bad, the pawn structure is compromised, and white has the center. So at least if black suffers, he has to suffer for something. So he has to protect the pawn, which he can do by playing h5. So, however, the problem with h5 is that white can very quickly start opening the files. f3. This move has an additional advantage. First of all, I'm attacking the pawn on g4, which is good, but on the other side also I'm protecting the pawn e4. So if black takes on f3, I can either take with the pawn or with the bishop. Now my pawn on e4 is protected, so b4 is never a threat anymore, because it makes no sense to play b4 if you cannot take on e4. And the f file becomes open, so short castle, and black supposedly will die. So which means he has to find a way, like a plan what to do, because on the one side he doesn't want to give the pawn back, on the other side keeping the pawn with h5 is not an option. So the best thing he can do in reality in this position is to develop his pieces and to try to activate his bishop on b7 somehow. So the ideal plan is to play knight e7, a6, c5. So these three moves. If black manages to do them, he will be fine. So let's see how the game developed. Black plays knight e7. And white doesn't take on g4. And that's for a reason. He doesn't want to give black time to develop his pieces. So after knight takes g4, now black can play b4. Knight takes f6. Knight takes f6. Knight a4. Knight takes e4. And here it looks like the position is getting open, but black has some counter chances now. The bishop e5, rook g8. So white can take on c4. So we have equal amount of pawns now, but black plays queen a5, b3 for example, and long castle. And this position is crazy, which is typical for a Botvinnik system. This position is absolutely crazy, but black has his chances, and it's absolutely not clear who is better here. It's a very tactical position. So if white wants to play for initiative, then he should not care about the pawns. So Nakamura takes on d7. Black takes with a queen. If black takes with a knight, well, this is a little bit different. First of all, now I can take on g4 because the pawn e4 is not hanging. So after b4 I simply play knight a4. No one is taking on e4. And if c5, then d5. That's almost winning. After knight f6, I have always bishop f3. So this is not a problem. Second, I don't even need to take on g4 immediately. I can wait and play short castle first. Because black is definitely not going to lose more time by playing h5. That's just too slow. So Ding decides to take with the queen, but of course this move has huge drawback, and the drawback is bishop e5. So now, whatever black does, white has this ideas with queen c1 and queen f4. So after bishop e7, or queen d2 and queen e4. After bishop e7, for example, white plays queen d2, rook h7, because after rook g8 I take on h6, queen f4. The knight has to go back to g8. Well, that looks really bad. Bishop g7 doesn't solve the problem either, because the bishop, now the knight is still pinned. Here white can consider even taking on g4, because black cannot take on g4, I'll take on g7. So I take on g4, go back to f3, and I'm fine. So for this reason, black plays queen e7. And the idea of this move is simple. I just need the square d7 for the king, so I want to play rook g8 and knight d7, if possible, of course. And I think in this position, the better move would be bishop takes g4. Nakamura played b3, but I doubt that's the right decision. I just take on g4, rook g8, put the bishop on f3, and after knight d7 I go back with the bishop to g3 or to f4. And this should be fine. White should be better here. Instead of this, however, Nakamura plays b3. Well, the decision to open the position is correct, but maybe the implementation was not the best. So now, for example, black had the possibility to play rook g8. So first of all, the pawn is protected. And if you take on c4 with the pawn, now I play b4. Knight a4 and knight takes e4. And black still has the extra pawn. He can castle long if he needs to. And he has this, slow by slow, he has this ideas like f6. If the bishop goes to h2, then g3. If the bishop goes to f4, then maybe e5, or first long castle and e5. So the fact that white had to take on c4 with the pawn and not with the bishop, and the c file is closed, that limits his possibilities a little bit. So rook g8 could be a better decision, but in the game black took on b3, a takes b3, and black plays a6. So again, nobody cares about pawn g4, and again rook g8 could be a better option. a6 is very slow, it gives white too much time. And again, bishop takes g4, rook g8, bishop f3, this probably would give white a decent advantage. Not plus minus, but plus over equality, definitely. Right, so in the game, Nakamura plays queen c1, rook g8, and short castle. And black started to play for a win, which was his big mistake in this game. He played knight h5. So the idea when you play knight h5, the idea is clear. You want to take on h4 and play g3. But this is a little bit unrealistic. It's a very long way until black can checkmate white. At least after queen takes h4, there is always g3 from the side of white. I think a better option would be just to play knight d7. I'm attacking the bishop goes away, then either I move the queen to f6 or I play bishop g7. It doesn't mean that the problems of black are solved, of course not, because the king is in the center, he cannot castle short anymore at all. If he castles long, then you always have to consider d5, knight takes b5, all these possibilities. So the position is still very dangerous. But putting the knight on the side of the board in such situations, that doesn't seem right. What comes is now is typical Nakamura, d5. And at this moment the position starts getting very bad. And black loses it in one move actually. If black took on d5, white can simply take back. Queen takes e5 and rook e1. And it turns out that the attack of white is very strong. Long castle doesn't work because of bishop takes g4, rook takes g4 and rook takes e5. And if not long castle, then what else? If the queen moves away, I have two moves. Bishop takes g4, check, or bishop takes b5, also checks with the rook, and then d takes c6. Bishop d6, I just move the bishop away to f1. I'm winning. I'm winning the queen. There is nothing else. Like, this position must be lost. Like king d8 or king d7, well, again, bishop takes b5, then I take on c6. For example, after king d8, bishop takes b5. That looks very dangerous. If you sacrifice the queen, that will not be enough, I think. In fact, rook d1, don't exchange the rook. And then queen e5. D takes c6 is a threat, queen e5. All the black pieces are discoordinated. So black cannot take on d5, but maybe the better move that he still had was f6, which is quite hard to find. f6, and then just simply ask white what is he going to do. Is he going to take on c6, which is an option, bishop takes c6. Maybe if the knight takes b5 now. That looks pretty dangerous. The bishop h2, of course, that makes no sense. I can just play e5. So when I close the bishop, then I'm happy. After d takes c6, maybe black has to take on e5. If you take on b7, then queen takes b7. So for now, black has an extra pawn. Of course, the position is very shaky, but at least he's not losing anything immediately. The knight can go to f4, and the center is closed. That's the most important. Well, anyway, in the game, after d5, black took on h4. Of course, he got g3, queen g5, and I guess that Ding overlooked the response of white here. He didn't say d takes c6. That's what I think. Because now his position falls apart. Now after bishop takes c6, there is knight takes b5, and nothing helps. Literally. Queen takes e5, there is queen c6. A takes b5, I take on c6, bishop takes b5, I take on b5, and queen c6 with checkmate. So bishop takes c6 loses, and if bishop takes c6 loses, then what else? A queen takes c1, loses to c takes b7. Queen takes f1, rook takes f1, or whatever, king takes f1, and b8 in the next move. Or maybe even worse. The rook has nowhere to go. Rook d8. I can play b8. Maybe I can also just play bishop e7. Maybe even bishop c7. Maybe stronger. And take on d8 and b8. So no chance for black in this position. So Ding took on e5. C takes b7. Rook takes b7. But here we can already see that the game should be over very soon. And especially when Nakamura has white in such a position. So knight d5, that concludes. Queen c6 is a threat. Queen d6 loses to many moves. There's queen c8. At least there's rook takes a6. If queen takes a6, then knight c7. So everything goes here. Takes d5. Queen c8. King e7. It's interesting that actually white has no threats and still black is lost, even though he has an extra piece. So rook takes a6. So it turns out that black has simply nothing to move. He has no good moves here. The idea of white now is queen c5. So if black plays bishop g7, then I think the easiest is just queen c5, and now king d7 I have bishop takes g4 or bishop takes b5, and now, after king d8 I have rook d6. So yeah, and besides there is nothing else to play. If f6, then bishop takes g4, and rook e6 is a deadly threat. And also bishop takes h5, because if queen takes on h5, I simply take on b8. Well, black tried knight g3, but he simply got bishop takes b5, so the idea is again queen c5, knight e2, bishop takes e2, and again black has no time for g3 because of queen c5, so he plays f6, rook e6, queen takes e6, and queen takes b8. And black gave up because he has simply no moves. White wants to play queen c7. If queen d7, then queen c8. And the bishop on f8 cannot move anywhere. The files on the king side are closed. g3 is too slow because of queen c7. So yeah, the very interesting game from Nakamura. He basically won out of the opening. It's interesting to see where exactly did black made a mistake, because it looked like he's doing moves that made sense, but obviously something went wrong. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this game. This is Leonid Kritz for chesslectures.com, signing out.